You know that feeling when you're sitting in the middle of a group, everyone talking, laughing, sharing stories, and somehow you still feel like you're on the outside of the glass? You're physically there. You respond when spoken to, you even smile at the right moments, but there's a quiet distance inside you that no one else seems to notice. It's strange because from the outside, it doesn't look like loneliness at all. There's a certain kind of person who often experiences this. They're usually described as calm, grounded, agreeable. They don't create friction, they go along. They make conversations easier, smoother. People feel comfortable around them. And yet, those same people can walk away from social gatherings feeling unseen. Society tends to label this gently rounded, easygoing personality as emotionally healthy, balanced, mature, low maintenance. If anything feels off, the assumption is that it must just be mood or overthinking. After all, how can someone feel alone when they're surrounded by others and causing no problems? But this isn't a flaw, and it isn't attention-seeking. It's a pattern. What we rarely talk about is why some people feel deeply alone even in the presence of many others. There's more going on here than people realize. Psychology has long studied the difference between social connection and emotional connection. They are not the same thing. You can have proximity without intimacy, interaction without resonance, words without vulnerability. Research in social neuroscience shows that the brain doesn't measure connection by the number of people around you. It measures it by perceived attunement. In simple terms, your nervous system relaxes when it feels understood, not when it's merely included. When you're the rounded person in the room, the one who adapts easily, smooths over tension, keeps things pleasant, your brain is often scanning for harmony. This trait overlaps with what psychologists call high agreeableness and high social attunement. These are not weaknesses, they're adaptive traits that make relationships function. But there's a quiet trade-off. When your energy is focused on maintaining group comfort, it can come at the cost of revealing your inner world. You adjust your tone, you soften your opinions, you filter the heavier thoughts. Over time, people learn the version of you that keeps the room stable, not necessarily the version that feels complex, conflicted, or raw. Neuroscience suggests that our brains are wired for belonging through shared emotional disclosure. When we express something vulnerable and it's received with care, the brain releases oxytocin, strengthening bonds. But if you rarely risk that vulnerability, those deeper bonds don't fully form. So you can be well-liked, trusted, even appreciated, and still feel unknown. Often, this pattern doesn't start in adulthood. It begins much earlier. In developmental psychology, children who grow up in environments where emotional intensity felt unsafe or overwhelming sometimes learn to become stabilizers. Maybe there was conflict at home. Maybe a parent was unpredictable. Maybe emotions were dismissed or minimized. In those situations, becoming easy, agreeable, and emotionally low demand can feel like a survival strategy. The nervous system learns harmony equals safety, so you adapt. You become the one who doesn't add weight, the one who listens more than speaks, the one who understands others quickly. This works. It protects you. It helps you build social circles. It even earns admiration. But the nervous system still has its own needs. It still longs for reciprocal depth. There's nothing wrong with being rounded, calm, or adaptable. Different people are wired differently. Some naturally lead with bold expression. Others lead with quiet attunement. Neither is better, neither is more evolved. The loneliness that sometimes accompanies this personality isn't a moral failure or a weakness. It's simply the cost of a strategy that once kept you safe. And here's the paradox. The very trait that makes people feel comfortable around you can make it harder for them to see when you're struggling. Because you're so skilled at holding emotional space for others, they may assume you don't need it in return. You might even reinforce that belief. When someone asks, "How are you?" the automatic response is, "I'm fine." Not because you're lying, but because explaining the truth feels complicated or inconvenient or unnecessary. Over time, the gap widens. You were present in many relationships, but deeply known in very few. There's also a quieter layer. People who are highly attuned to others often feel more intensely than they show. They pick up subtle shifts in tone, micro-expressions, changes in energy. Their brains are constantly processing. But because they're busy reading the room, they don't always allow the room to read them.
That asymmetry creates a subtle exhaustion. You're absorbing, adjusting, harmonizing, without feeling fully mirrored back. None of this means you're broken. It means your nervous system learned efficiency. It learned how to move through social environments smoothly. It learned how to protect connection by preventing conflict. And that makes sense. The loneliness isn't proof that something is wrong with you. It's a signal that part of you wants deeper resonance, not just smooth interaction. There's also a hidden strength here. People who feel alone in crowds often have extraordinary emotional intelligence. They understand nuance. They can sense what others need before it's spoken. They can create psychological safety for people who struggle to express themselves. That ability has real value, but like any strength, it becomes balanced only when it's reciprocal. If there is one small shift that can begin to change this pattern, it's not about becoming louder or more dramatic. It's not about abandoning your nature. It's about allowing 1 degree more truth in safe spaces. Not everywhere, not with everyone. Just one small, specific layer of honesty with someone who has shown themselves to be steady. Instead of, "I'm fine," maybe it's, "I've actually been feeling a bit off lately." Instead of smoothing over disagreement, maybe it's, "I see it a little differently." It sounds small, but to the nervous system, that act of measured vulnerability signals something powerful. I am allowed to exist here too. When that expression is met with understanding, your brain registers attunement. That's when the loneliness begins to soften. You don't need 100 deep connections. Most people don't. What the brain truly craves is a few spaces where your inner landscape is seen without you having to edit it into something more palatable. If any of this feels familiar, it's not because you're overly sensitive or ungrateful for the people around you. It's because your wiring prioritizes harmony. Harmony sometimes hides depth. There's nothing defective about that, but there may be more of you waiting to be known. And if this quiet realization resonates, there are other patterns like this, subtle, invisible dynamics that shape how you connect and why you sometimes feel the way you do.